Today we're going to be showing you the Jspec series suspension from JKS. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Northridge 4x4 Do-It-Yourself Garage. And yes, today we're going to be talking about the Jspec series suspensions from JKS. Now the Jspec series suspensions, well, there's many different models, anywhere from mild to wild. And what we installed on this Gladiator is a 3-inch J Control suspension. And that's their basic J Venture suspension with geometry control arm brackets installed. And geometry control arm brackets are one of those things that we highly encourage you to take a look at when you're lifting your JL and JT. And that's because as we lift it, we're pushing the chassis farther away from the axle, causing a steeper angle on those control arms. And the only way you can fix that is by adding the geometry control brackets on the frame, and that's going to drop the back of those brackets down, getting that geometry of those control arms a little closer to what Jeep originally intended or had engineered for. And that's going to give you better handling. Now for shocks, we went with the 2.5-inch Fox IFP shocks. And IFP stands for internal floating piston. And that floating piston inside helps keep the gas separated from the oil. And that's going to give you a better ride, especially when things get rough. Now we've already installed the suspension on this Gladiator, so let's go ahead and re-roll the camera and show you how we did it. Now the first thing we like to do with all suspensions is to get a before measurement. We measure from the bottom edge of the wheel straight up to the edge of the fender. We're going to do that at all 4 corners and make note of it. Then when it's time to get the tools out and get to the disassembly, we started in the rear with the rear track bar bolt at the axle. We then removed the shocks and loosened up the control arm bolts, which will allow the axle to droop down even more. Remove the sway bar links, disconnect the vent line and the locker wiring harness if you have one. To install the new coil springs, we're going to swap the top pad over and line up the pigtail to the pad, and then take note of the alignment nipple. Now this needs to go up into the hole in the top coil seat. If not, it can cause the coil to not sit evenly and bow out at an angle. Next to install are the shocks. Now we chose the Fox 2.5 IFP shocks for their maximum performance. Now once you get the shocks in, you don't want to torque the shock bolts down until the vehicle is sitting on the ground. Bump stop blocks are next, and they're going to bolt right onto the OE bump stop plates. For the rear sway bar links, we adjusted them to 11 3/4 eye to eye and then bolted them in. Moving up front, just like the rear, we started by removing the track bar bolt, then loosening the control arms, disconnecting both locker and FAD wiring, then removing the shocks and the sway bar links, which will allow the axle to drop enough that we can remove the old coils. All right, one thing you got to be careful about is on your front isolators, your upper spring isolators, is you have these 2 tips and they go up into the holes in the spring bucket. And you've got to make sure that they line up. If they don't, they'll pinch down and that'll make your coil sit cockeyed and it'll actually put a bow in your coil. The problem is that these isolators don't just sit up there. So what you want to do is clean off your bump stop mount here. And then I just grabbed some electrical tape And we want to go right up towards the top. And I'm going to go around about 3 times. Now we can take our isolator, line those tits up with the holes up above, and just push it up over that tape, and that tape will hold that isolator in place. Then in go the new front coils and the bump stop spacers. Pro tip is to zip tie those bump stop spacers up inside the coil to hold it out of the way while you're installing that coil. Once the coil's in place, set the bump stop spacer on the coil bucket and bolt it in. Then it's time to put in those JKS geometry brackets. Support the axle securely and remove your control arms. On the diesel JLs and JTs, the passenger side upper control arm bolt at the frame can be a bear to get out. It contacts the top edge of the OE exhaust wrap. And we used a long screwdriver to help guide the bolt up and out of the way. Now this isn't a problem with the gas-powered rigs. The geometry brackets, or what JKS is calling their control arm correction brackets, are bolted into the OE control arm locations. The control arms are then bolted into the correction brackets. By lowering their mounting locations, we can help keep the suspension geometry closer to stock, giving you better road handling manners. For this 3-inch lift kit, we're using the upper hole for the upper control arms. Now, if we had more than 4 inches of lift, we'd be using the lower hole. Fully torque the geometry brackets into place, but leave the control arm bolts just a little loose because we don't want to tighten them until it's sitting on the ground. Then it's time to install the front shocks. Now, just like the rear, we don't want to torque these until the vehicle is sitting on the ground. Next up is the new JKS front track bar. Now we started at the recommended 34 inches eye to eye, but we'll be making any needed adjustments after we get this Gladiator back on the ground. Then it's time for the sway bar links. Now JKS recommends adjusting the links to 9 inches center of eye to center of eye. Insert the sway bar bushings, then the spacers, then bolt the links into the vehicle. One thing to note, we're using blue Loctite on all hardware. We want to make sure everything stays tight. We then reconnected the locker and the FAD harnesses, reinstalled the wheels and tires, and got the JT back on the ground. Now with the full vehicle weight on the ground, we're gonna go back in and we're gonna do the final tightening and torque on front and rear control arms and the front and rear shocks. Now of course the last thing we're gonna do is our height measurement. We're gonna add that to our center block on the notes, and this is gonna change as we get our Jeep out on the road and onto the trail, flexing those coil springs and getting them to settle in. We'll add actual settled measurements in about 1,000 miles once those coils are settled. So that's about all you need to know for the Jspec series suspensions from JKS. Now we did install this kit a while back and we put about 1,000 miles on this Gladiator since then. It's back here in the studio to get everything retorqued, make sure it all looks good. And we wanted to bring you this video after we had some seat time so we could kind of give you a good review on this. And well, we're gonna give you a good review. Now at the time that we installed the suspension, JKS didn't have diesel springs yet. And so we installed their gas springs. And we did notice a couple things. Because of the extra weight of the engine, well, first off, we didn't get the amount of height that that the kit was advertised for. But we knew that up front because of the heavier diesel engine's gonna settle those springs more. On the plus side, these springs are soft. It gives the Gladiator a very nice ride, much better than the OE suspension. And then coupled with those Fox IFPs, those internal floating piston shocks, it really ties the package in and makes this Gladiator drive very nice. So if you're looking for a new suspension for your JL or JT, well, maybe it's time to take a look at the Jspec suspension from JKS. Of course, we've got them here at Northridge 4x4, and you can hit that description box down below and check them out for yourself. And then I'm going to thank you for watching today. We'll see you again soon.